Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in today for the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation Virtual Policy Forum on Predator Management. I'm Keely Hopkins, the Pacific States Manager based in Portland, Oregon, and covering Alaska, California, Hawaii, Nevada, Oregon, and Washington. Before we get started, just a few small housekeeping items to cover. First, the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation is recording today's presentation. However, any recording, rebroadcast, or retransmission of this presentation or any of its parts without the written consent of CSF is prohibited. Second, we will have an opportunity for questions and answers at the end of the program. So if you have any questions for our panelists, please direct them to the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Now, with that out of the way, it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Ellery Tucker-Williams, who is the Assistant Manager of the Rocky Mountain region. Given the increase in attempts by anti-hunting interests at all levels to undermine the North American model of wildlife conservation through predator management, Ellery has recently taken on an expanded policy portfolio to become more heavily focused on predator management and policy, thus ensuring that CSF is at the forefront of discussions surrounding the sustainable conservation of America's predators and the role that sportsmen and women play in their management. So with that, I will now turn it over to Ellery to tell us more about the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation and to give us a detailed overview of today's webinar.
Thank you, Keely, for kicking us off today. As she said, my name is Ellery Tucker-Williams, Rocky Mountain State's Assistant Manager, coming to you live from Boise, Idaho, covering Arizona, Colorado, Idaho, Montana, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming. For those of you who aren't familiar, the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit whose mission is to work with Congress, governors, and state legislatures to protect and advance hunting, angling, recreational shooting, and trapping. To achieve this mission, CSF works hand in hand with the Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus in Washington, D.C., the Governor's Sportsmen's Caucus, comprised of 30 pro-sports men and women governors, and the individual state sportsmen's caucuses that collectively make up the National Assembly of Sportsmen's Caucuses, with 49 of 50 states represented. It is through this legislative network, in addition to our conservation and outdoor sporting partners, that CSF remains your premier inside connection to outdoor legislation. The topic of today's webinar is one that has continued to dominate conversations and headlines nationwide. From coyotes to mountain lions, wolves, and bears, predator management is something that is ubiquitous across the United States. However, despite its necessity, predator management has come under increased and misguided scrutiny. Whether it be through ill-conceived policy, ballot initiatives, agenda-driven game and fish commission decisions, litigation, or propaganda, the anti-hunting and animal rights community have made it abundantly clear that the ethical and regulated harvest of predators is unacceptable, regardless of the science behind such management decisions. In today's panel discussion, we will dive a little deeper into the political, social, and ecological challenges behind managing America's most charismatic species. With that introduction out of the way, I am pleased to introduce our first panelist, Chris Tymason, the state and local liaison for the Safari Club International, covering the western half of the United States. Chris joined SCI over 2 decades ago, Chris joined CSF after 2 decades of service as Chief Legal Counsel for the Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks. We are excited to have Chris join us to discuss the trends he has seen nationwide when it comes to predator management. Chris, thank you for joining us, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Ellery. I appreciate the introduction, although I'm with SCI, not CSF. Just teasing.
Whoops.
All right, so I am the Western States Liaison for SCI, state and local. I handle everything west of the Mississippi, so that's a pretty wide swath of the country, and I have a counterpart in the East, B. Frederick. And in a nutshell, the trend that we're seeing across the states is increasing attacks on predator hunting and trapping, mountain lions, bears, bobcats, coyotes. In fact, I think it's troubling enough. SCI, I'd have to mention, the foundation has hired a new conservation program manager for carnivores. That's Maria Davidson. She's based out of Wyoming, and she comes with a vast amount of experience, having been with the Louisiana Department of Wildlife, Fish and Wildlife for 28 years, and she worked on Louisiana black bear. So she's got a lot of experience that she brings to SCI and SCIF. I think generally characterizing predators and the attacks, the continued attacks ramping up, I would say that anti-hunters and trappers see predators as low-hanging fruit. Taking these species on one by one in a concerted effort to try to stop those activities. And I think that they do that based on emotion, preying on people's emotion and not science, clearly. They try to humanize species, specifically trying to name those animals, give them a name, an individual animal, and humanize that animal, and try to portray these animals as cuddly creatures, because after all, aren't mountain lions and bobcats just cats? And we all associate bears with teddy bears and things like that. I am surprised to see the number of anti-hunters that are springing up in states that I would not traditionally have thought of coming from Kansas. And I'll start with a few examples and bills. So at the federal level, HR 7398 would prohibit killing contests on federal public lands. And obviously I'm paying attention to that because that primarily impacts the West, where most of our public lands reside. And it was introduced in April. As of yesterday, it had 22 co-sponsors. Less than half of those are from Western states, which I found to be interesting. I recall working on coyote issues in Kansas, and our estimated average harvest through trapping and hunting was over 100,000 coyotes, 100 to 120,000 coyotes. Coyotes are proliferating despite that level of hunting and trapping. And so I think that shows us that banning contests, because, for example, coyotes in Kansas, you can hunt them year round, all during light hours. You can hunt them at night, depending on certain circumstances, if you have a permit during the time of the season. And biologically, it has no impact. So this is just an emotional issue. As Ellery stated, I started at SCI in December after 22 years with the Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks as the chief attorney, and I was basically thrown into the proverbial fire starting right before legislative sessions and commissions. And so I'm following 24 commissions, 24 legislatures. And that takes me to my next example, which is Colorado. That was the first issue that I really worked on, dealing with predators. And Senate Bill 31 was an attempt to ban hunting and trapping of lynx, bobcats, and mountain lions. It was defeated, but undoubtedly, I think that's going to come back in a different form. And I've got to give some props to a coalition that exists in Colorado. Ellery is integral in that coalition, and talking to those legislators and making those contacts as a coalition, I think, was key in defeating that bill. Trapping is already prohibited in Colorado, but box trapping isn't. So many of us feel that the real target in that case is box trapping of bobcats. And as lynx are already protected species, and the average person doesn't go out and trap mountain lions in a box. It requires a little more skill, bigger equipment. So that's left really to game and fish agencies. So the real target there is going to be box trapping of bobcats. Right after that, there was a concerted effort in Arizona as Arizona went through their hunt guidelines related to mountain lions and bears, a concerted effort by anti-hunters to try to alter those hunt guidelines. The hunting community responded, and those attempts were defeated. There was also a bear hunting ban right away. Again, when I started in California, and Bill's going to talk about that more, but it followed other bear hunting ban issues, and that was defeated. Marie's going to talk about Washington State, which has a whole bunch of stuff going on right now related to predators. SCI has done a large amount of work there, as have many of our partners. But spring bear season wolves, and mountain lions are all on the agenda right now as we speak in their commission process. In Oregon, IP3, which was IP13, has gotten certified for ballot language. That's a ballot initiative. It would ban hunting, fishing, trapping, agricultural things, along with a number of other items under the guise of cruelty to animals. SCI, along with our many partners, submitted individual comments on the ballot language. Keely is instrumental in that as well. That ballot language was certified, and now they're in the process of gathering, I think, 112,000 signatures to get that on the ballot in 2024. So that's a looming fight out there. In Montana, there's a comment period open on fur bear and wolf trapping, hunting seasons and quotas. They just set their mountain lion season as well. Anti-hunters and anti-trappers, surprisingly to me, were in attendance at those meetings and leaving comments, and they were commenting online. So while I appreciate Zoom access that cuts both ways, it allows people from other locations to make comments that are contrary to what we're wanting to do. Wyoming, and I don't know if Jason's going to talk about this, just took comments on mountain lion and wolf season. SCI submitted comments, and again, at the last commission meeting that I watched, there were anti-hunters in attendance. That one really surprised me. I've spent extensive amount of time in Wyoming as a hunter and just did not envision that in that state. Minnesota has an open comment period on their wolf plan. Anti-hunters are commenting. I'm monitoring those. New Mexico had a trapping ban that went into place on public land in March, I believe, this year. And that's obviously going to impact the ability of trappers to take mountain lions and coyotes in New Mexico. And then finally, not to leave Texas out of the mix, Texas recently had a petition filed at their commission level. It's in that process. It's my understanding that the department has recommended to deny that petition and then form a work group that will be commented on by the commission in their August meeting, August 24th and 25th. I think are the dates. And it's raising quite a bit of consternation in the state of Texas amongst ranchers and hunters. There are quite a few comments that are going to the governor's office and that commission. And I think it's imperative that we all, as hunters and anglers and outdoor users, make our comments known. So as you can see, the hunters, the anti-hunters and trappers are out in full force. I think it's critical, again, that hunters and trappers submit those comments, take action, make calls. I worked for a director in an agency and a commission for 22 years. Sometimes in the legislature, in that legislative process, I would be the only person commenting on a bill, whether in opposition or support. And without that public testimony, especially as a lawyer, I need that public testimony to form that record in case there's an appeal process or litigation that follows. We can't leave these things up to the whim of a single person or a legislator or a commissioner, and we need to hold people accountable for their decisions and make our voices heard, because the anti-hunting public is not stopping. And I think that's exacerbated more so as society becomes urban and more urban and suburbanized. And I'd pass it back to Ellery. Thank you.
Chris, thank you again for joining us and that excellent review of kind of the trends we're seeing at all levels right now related to predator management. Next up, we'll move to our second panelist to start our discussion on some of the current challenges and opportunities related to predator management from a state agency perspective. Joining us next is Jason Hunter, Lander Region Wildlife Supervisor for the Wyoming Department of Game and Fish. After earning a BS in Wildlife and Fisheries Biology and Management from the University of Wyoming, Jason joined the department in 2004, where he started out as a game warden. Over the years, Jason has worked with wildlife issues ranging from bighorn sheep and grizzly bears to pika and cutthroat trout. Jason, thank you very much for joining us, and I will turn it over to you.
Yeah, Thanks, Ellery. And really, yeah, in Wyoming was going to really focus on some of the limitations with the Endangered Species Act, and specifically with wolves and grizzly bears. So over the years, we've had on and off ESA listings for both listings, delistings, and relistings for both wolves and grizzly bears. Wolves are currently under state management, and grizzly bears are technically considered a threatened population under the ESA. We as an agency, and so the hunting public, have invested millions of dollars towards grizzly bear management and recovery over the years. We as, again, the state agency conduct nearly all the on-the-ground work to monitor the population and resolve conflicts outside of the national park system and the Wind River Reservation. So, but we still lack management authority. So we have no final say in management practices for grizzly bears specifically, and wolves when they were relisted a few years ago. So really what that means is we're doing all the work, but we need to get permission for any removals of those animals because we're not able to use hunting as a conservation tool right now. And so that, I guess, we feel like something we should be celebrating the success, the recovery of these animals, but we're not able to do that. And what we're seeing is some of the supporters we've had in the past, some of the public, the hunting and fishing public, some of their support for recovery or seeing those animals on the landscape starts to erode because they see there's just not a lot of opportunity for management, active management. So, and like I said, we also, we've had partners over the years, and a lot of those folks, kind of consider it a slap in the face. We work with a lot of different agencies, communities, public, sportsmen and women, livestock producers, to get support for these animals on the landscape, with the hope that someday, we can actively manage, hunt these species, and the longer these species stay on the list, the less support we have. So those are some of the things we're facing right now. Most of our conflicts we see, specifically with grizzly bears, occur outside of the recovery area. So outside of that northwest Wyoming portion, we've got expansions into cornfields, expansions into areas where there's just no public tolerance, and really no place for grizzly bears, just large population groups, large for Wyoming, I should say. And so again, a third of our verified conflicts with grizzly bears occur outside of those areas. And we keep seeing less and less tolerance from the overall public. Yeah, and I think that's it in a nutshell for ESA and state management and some of the challenges we're facing. Big picture, again, it's just the loss of any acceptance of these species on the landscape without the ability to manage them.
Thank you again, Jason, for joining us and for that excellent overview. So moving further out west now into a state that recently made headlines over its spring bear hunting debate, it's my pleasure to introduce Marie Neumiller, who is Executive Director of the Inland Northwest Wildlife Council and has been a leading force in the Washington sportsman's community. Marie, thank you for being with us today, and I'll turn it over to you to discuss what you're seeing with anti-hunting interests on the Fish and Wildlife Commissions as it relates to predator management.
Thank you, Keely. So I started with the Inland Northwest Wildlife Council in March of 2020, and I immediately began testifying at our commission meetings here in this state on behalf of our members. Over the past 2 years, I've really watched the commission change drastically, faster than I actually believed possible. In the beginning, much of the anti-hunting efforts that I saw were cloaked with certain commissioners pushing minor changes to policy language or attempts to redefine the term conservation. But with several new commission appointments changing the majority vote in our state, a lot of those efforts have moved up to the forefront. We now have commissioners openly stating that hunting and fishing are the biggest threats to wildlife populations, and other things like that it is immoral to kill any predator ever. they're using kind of interesting actions to get anti-predator hunting or predator management for that matter through by doing minor things that we don't have a whole lot of recourse against. They're changing policies within the commission, which require less public notice and less public involvement. They're also attempting to redefine their mandate, looking at wordings, saying that in Washington state, we do have a mandate that says they have to maximize hunting and fishing opportunities. Well, they're redefining that as maximizing hunting and fishing opportunities for youth, elders, and people with disabilities. So it's more about just providing access in their mind than actually allowing hunting and fishing. And they're also challenging the science that's being brought to them by the Department of Fish and Game. We had a commissioner at the last commission meeting state that no amount of science they could bring would satisfy his questions and concerns about the population. So he believed that it would not be possible to bring back spring bear hunting because we'll never have exacting population data. Exacting population data on predators, which are secretive, which, I mean, that's the whole method of how they operate. You'll never get exacting population data. It's hard enough to get exacting population data on a herd of cattle in a large field. So what they're asking for, they know is impossible for our department biologists to research, to study, and to give those numbers. But then they always have a way out to say, well, we can't hunt these bears because we need to take the precautionary principle because we could be harming the population because we don't have exacting data. So we've seen a lot of attacks on the definition of conservation itself. What does it actually mean? We've seen efforts to try and make the science not as quality, make it appear that it's not good, strong science. And in a state like Washington, where our wolf population is growing in spite of everything, Conservation Northwest recently named Washington State the best state to live if you're a wolf. Even with that data and our growing population over time, they are saying that what we are doing is not enough and we must go back even further. To the point where commissioners are openly saying that they apply more intrinsic value to predators over any other wildlife species. Unfortunately, that hurts biodiversity, and I don't think that they're seeing that or that they are refusing to see that. So it's going to be interesting how we work through this effort and how all of our groups can come together to come through this, because we need the focus to be on strong science, but they are actually using the science to cut back seasons. And even looking at elk numbers, the science is showing us our elk herd here in the Blue Mountains is not surviving. They are struggling. We don't have enough calf retention for that herd to make it through. And the biggest cause of calf mortality is cougar predation. But we have a commission that is not willing to deal with the cougar predation issue. One of the most recent comments was, we're not going to allow you to kill more predators just so that you can kill more elk. And so it's really a movement. They are against the hunting of both elk and cougars. And so they're refusing to properly manage the populations just to prevent that hunting is what we're seeing in our state right now.
Thank you, Marie. We appreciate you joining us today and sharing the struggles that you're facing in Washington. So in addition to the attacks on science-based management at the commission level, we're also seeing an increase in the frequency of these attacks in the legislature and also through ballot initiatives. So moving next to a state that's seen more than its fair share of attacks, it's my honor to introduce Bill Gaines of Gaines and Associates, who's been working on hunting and conservation issues in California for the last 30 years. Bill, we would love to hear more of what you have seen and learned from working in a state like California, both the good, the bad, and the ugly. So with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Keely, and then thanks for the opportunity to be on today's webinar. Yeah, I've been doing this for 30 years, so I've seen quite a few changes, over the past 3 decades. I will tell you that some of these changes actually happened before I even started doing this back in 1992. California led the way with a ballot initiative back in June of 1990, which completely shut off the hunting of mountain lions here in California. That ballot initiative did leave depredation permits for mountain lions in place. But over the course of the last several years, the Department of Fish and Wildlife has stepped up what it takes to get a depredation permits for mountain lions. And they're very, very hard to get. You have to go through numerous non-lethal attempts to get rid of a problem cat before you can even possibly take it with a depredation permit. Also, we have what we're calling ecologically significant units now for mountain lions, where they're technically listed under the California Endangered Species Act down in Southern California. So there'll be no depredation in that part of the world at all. So we've already lost the opportunity years ago to be able to control our mountain lion population, short of maybe just a handful of depredation permits for major problem lions. We don't have the wolf problem here in California that Washington and Oregon and Idaho have. We do have 3 packs, total of maybe about 25 wolves statewide, which is plenty, right? But I will tell you that surprisingly, our Fish and Game Commission, I believe it was back in 2014, actually listed the gray wolf as endangered here in California. And at the time, we didn't even have a single wolf that we knew about in the state of California. We had an OR7 come down through Oregon and work his way through California for a while. He turned around and went back to Oregon, and we had no other data showing that there was any wolves here in California. But regardless of that, the California Fish and Game Commission determined that they were going to list wolves in California. So they are still listed. So if there's a problem wolf out there that's dealing with livestock and causing either public safety issues or livestock issues or what have you, there's nothing we can do about it here in California. No depredation permits, anything like that. Landowners just have to do what they can via non-lethal means to try to get rid of problem wolves like that. Chris mentioned bears. We have definitely fought our challenges on bears. I will tell you that right now, black bear populations in California are estimated to be at all-time historic highs. I'm hearing numbers. I mean, we've heard 30 to 40,000 for years, but going back and looking at an EA that the department did back in 2009, they said we had over 40,000 then. We lost the ability to use dogs on hunting bears back in 2012. That was a huge loss of a hunting tool, if you will. And since then, we've faced challenges. Back in the state legislature, back in 2021, just over a year ago, we had Senate Bill 252, which was introduced, which would have flat out banned bear hunting throughout the state. We killed that legislation very, very quickly through a really good, massive, combination of NGOs weighing in and grassroots weighing in as well. And most recently, as I think Chris just alluded to just a few minutes ago, we actually had the Humane Society of the United States petition our California Fish and Game Commission to ban bear hunting in California, saying that we needed a bear management plan and a variety of other things that needed to be taken into account, impacts on bears due to wildfire and loss of habitat and so on and so forth. We were able to kill that petition as well back in April. So when it comes to bears, we can still hunt them here in California. We cannot use dogs, haven't been able to do that for about 10 years. We have no spring season for bears. We have no bait. We can't use bait here for bears either. And at the same time, the department has upped the ante on bear depredation policy to where now you have to go through several non-lethal attempts to get rid of a problem bear before you can take that bear under depredation permit. So we're fighting battles. Bears are new. They've already taken care of lions. They've already taken care of wolves. Bears are the new sweetheart of the animal rights folks here in California. They love their bears. They love them up in Tahoe. They love them everywhere. But the problem is that we have way too many bears in California. Hunting is our only management tool, and we're being limited on how much we can take with them simply because they won't allow us to use the tools we need to hunt bears, most notably dogs, to take care of those bears, not to mention spring seasons and baits. So we anticipate more battles on the bear front, and we'll face those as they come. I will tell you that one of the good things on the bear front, especially back in 2021 when we fought Senate Bill 252, was it was a real rallying cry for California. As been mentioned on this a few times already this morning, California is kind of the tip of spear, has been for a long time when it comes to animal rights folks pushing for closing various hunting seasons and so forth. We've learned a little bit from our mistakes over the years. And when Senate Bill 252 came up in 2021, it was a real wake-up call. We had all the organizations, weighed in on that, but we had a massive grassroots input as well, which played a big role in helping to kill that bill. That bill was pulled by Senator Wiener out of San Francisco before it was even heard. That's what kind of a massive outcry that we had on that. We also, when we lost the use of dogs back in 2012, it initiated our effort to build a greater coordination between all the hunting groups here in California. And that's the California Hunting and Conservation Coalition, which I have the pleasure of chairing, that's now been up and operating, I'm guessing, for about 7 or 8 years. And that has really proven to be an excellent tool to make sure that all the various conservation groups that are out there, whether they are politically active or not beforehand, are all at the table. They're all aware of all the challenges that we're facing. They're up to speed on the status of those challenges. And our coordination is such now to where we can react very, very quickly in mass across the NGOs, to weigh in on whether it be positive legislation, or negative legislation, or something in front of the Fish and Game Commission. Bobcats, let's talk about the state legislature, for example. We did lose the ability to hunt or trap bobcats, back in 2019 by some legislation that was passed in the law. We were able at the last minute to get language in there that said that if the department were able to complete a management plan, they could bring it back to the commission. A management plan would have to be provided to the commission, of course, and also to the state legislature, that talked about the status of bobcats. And the commission, if they, in the language of the bill says, if the commission determines that a hunt is necessary, how you define that, not sure, but that the commission does have the authority to reopen bobcat hunting after January 1st of 2025, if the department can put together a compelling management plan that calls for bobcat management. We'll tell you that the department is putting that management plan together. We had to go get a specific appropriation out of the legislature to fund that effort. We did that a couple of years ago. They're working on that bobcat management plan. I'm coordinating with the department pretty much daily on all this stuff. And I would say that management plan is on track to be completed prior to January 1st, 2025. So there's a chance that we might get bobcat hunting back at some point in time, but right now we can't hunt them. The one predator that we can still hunt in California is coyotes, which, we can hunt 365, 24/7. Can't use lights at night, but you can hunt them at night here in California. So that's good news. We have faced our challenges on coyotes though as well. 2 years back, coyote contests they're still very popular, but they were highly promoted. Went out there, people came from all over the state to join in on these coyote contests and so on and so forth. Well, the animal rights folks got wind of that, and they gave us a serious challenge in front of the Fish and Game Commission just a few years ago. So the result of that was we can still have coyote contests. The prizes that you can hand out as a result to the winners of those contests has been severely stripped back by the Fish and Game Commission. And the folks that are putting on those contests have learned that it's not really a good idea to promote them far and wide, because there's a lot of people out there listening that don't support that kind of stuff. I will tell you that we have learned some lessons. We right now have a very good Fish and Game Commission, believe it or not. We've had our bad ones. We've had several bad ones, and we've lost a lot of our hunting opportunity as a result, but we've got a real good commission. We've got 5 seats on the commission here right now. Only 4 are seated. We've got 1 open seat, and I can promise you that the Hunting and Conservation Coalition here in California is doing everything we can to try to get our governor to appoint somebody to that open seat that is familiar with hunting and fishing, knows the incredible role it plays in wildlife conservation, and somebody that will support what we care dirty about here in the state of California. So it's interesting. We've been the tip of the spear for a long, long time. We've suffered our battles. We've learned. We've gotten a lot smarter. We're still fighting our battles daily out here, but now we're seeing it start to spread to these other states, and hopefully they can maybe learn from some of the mistakes that we made, and we can help guide them with some of the things that we've done right, and we can work together to put down these threats to hunting throughout the West Coast and frankly throughout the nation.
Thank you, Bill, and we certainly appreciate all the work that you're doing down in California. So before we move on to questions from the audience, we do have a few questions for our panelists. And Chris, we'll start with you for the first question. We've recently seen several lawsuits against state agencies for failing to manage predators, that arguably resulted in human injuries. Can you walk us through how these challenges are even possible? And do you foresee these lawsuits becoming more common?
All right. Before I start, I have to give my disclaimer that I'm not providing legal advice to any individual. Essentially, from a legal perspective, each state has a Tort Claims Act. It used to be that you couldn't sue the state, and then society decided that that wasn't right because sometimes individuals are wronged, and that civil wrong is called a tort. And so, like if an individual did something to another individual, and it was some sort of tortious civil wrong action, you could sue the individual who was either negligent or intentionally doing that. The same principle applies to state government. However, state government has, generally speaking, a lot of defenses to tort claims, like trying to think of the word here, discretionary functions. Like discretionary functions are usually immune. Like an individual has the ability, a state government actor has the ability to relocate a bear from one area to another or choose a different area. That's usually an immune discretionary function. That doesn't mean that the state's not going to end up in court. I just think that these are one-offs, really. I don't see them as successful ventures. However, I can think of one case in particular that occurred in Utah, and one of the defenses under the Tort Claims Act in Utah was like, it was a natural condition on the land, right? So if a rock fell off a cliff and hit somebody just randomly as they were climbing up a mountain, that's a defense. And in this particular instance, it was a bear that had been, and it was very bad facts, but it was a problem bear in a campground. And before they cleared out the campground and before they could post it that there's a bear in the area, a family came in and went camping, and there are a lot of disputed facts there as to what happened that night. But essentially, a bear came back and killed a child. And in that instance, the court ruled that the bear was not a dangerous condition on the land. And I think that had to do with some sort of recovery for the family. So the court kind of twisted it a little bit. That's in a nutshell what I think about these lawsuits and where they're going.
Thank you very much, Chris, for that. Next question goes to you, Jason. What are some of the biological or ecological challenges associated with managing predators in today's landscape? We've talked a lot about the human side and the policy side, but as we all know, landscapes are changing. We can't forget about the ecological and biological side. So what are some of the challenges today that you're facing? Yeah,
I mean, really habitat loss is a big one. Wyoming's typically been a pretty low population state, but we have seen an increase in influx over the years, a lot of expansion out of some of our city areas. And so I think that is probably one of the biggest challenges associated with predators on the landscape today. But again, I think the biggest threat is social. And I think in most of our cases, we still have predators increasing in abundance and distribution across Wyoming. It's just these pressures we see from both sides. One group wants to not kill anything, and then we're losing the support we have from the other side to actually manage predators on the landscape. So I guess overall, we are seeing a little bit of the biological threat with some habitat loss, but the biggest threat is the social threat at this time, and having the ability to continue to manage predators on the landscape.
Thank you, Jason. The next question will go out to the whole group, but Bill, I'll let you answer this one first. We've seen wildlife-related ballot initiatives come forward and be largely successful since the 1990s, as you mentioned earlier. Some even argue that ballot initiatives are the greatest threat to the North American model of wildlife conservation. How have you seen ballot initiatives shaping wildlife management? And then more importantly, what role do you see them playing in future conservation efforts?
Yeah, thank you, Keely. As I mentioned, yeah, we lost the ability to hunt mountain lions here in California years ago, via the ballot initiative. And by the way, I mean, that was before there really was much of an animal rights push at all in the state of California. And we basically, it was before my time, but from what I understand, we basically had zero organized effort to try to defeat that. And it only passed 52-48. So it was razor close. But I will tell you that here in California right now, with 40 million plus people, trying to get something on the ballot, for one, takes a ton of signatures, very, very expensive proposition. And once it gets on the ballot, trying to promote whether you're for or against is an extremely expensive proposition. I really don't see ballot initiatives as quite the option that they were maybe 10, 15 years ago. We actually had a discussion about 10 years ago about ballot initiatives here in California, where at the time we thought, okay, if the animal rights folks put something negative on the ballot, or if we want to put something pro-conservation on the ballot, it would have taken, this is back probably around 2010 timeframe, tens of millions of dollars to either pass or defeat that proposition. Pretty expensive. Now, prices have only gone up on that. So we haven't seen a direct threat on the ballot here in California for quite some time. And I think a lot of it is because it's just such a heavy lift financially and otherwise to try to do that. And with the legislature having super majorities, of largely, urban legislators here in California, I mean, it's a much quicker fix to try to go to the state legislature. The State Fish and Game Commission now, I mean, to their credit, are really opening up how the public can request changes in regulations. They have a somewhat new petition process, which is what we just faced on bears, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, that the public's very well of. We've had a lot of pro-hunting petitions come through the Fish and Game Commission. And of course, we certainly have more than our fair share of anti-hunting ones as well. So that's a much cheaper route. Legislature is a much cheaper route. So when it comes to California, I think we're going to see fewer and fewer ballot initiatives only because it's just a tough way to get something done here in the state. But I do think in other states, like we're seeing in Oregon right now with IP3, that it definitely is something that they certainly be aware of. We're aware of it here in California for sure, but we're fighting much more battles when it comes to the legislature and in front of the Fish and Game Commission.
Thank you, Bill. And I'll open it up to the group. I see Chris, you took your mute off.
Yeah, I would agree with Bill that ballot initiatives are expensive for sure. One most recent example is Colorado and the forced introduction of wolves there that passed by 12,000 votes. Colorado has since changed they changed it after the petition was certified, I think, that they require signatories from each county. And so I think that proposition would be a little more difficult in order to get the signatures onto the ballot. Also, Utah, for example, passed, I think it was 20 years ago, Prop 5, 22 years ago, that requires 2/3 majority to pass a ballot initiative related to wildlife. And so that's like that was an offensive tactic back in the late 90s. I think it was 99. So I think there are things that could be done, but even that ballot initiative is expensive. And we talk about them sometimes amongst our partners and amongst the hunting community. And you're talking millions and millions of dollars. It's very expensive. So I don't know that they're going to have as much influence in the future.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Chris and Bill. One last question before we move to the audience. This question is for the group, but Marie, we're going to let you start it off. What would be your one take-home message or action item for the outdoor sporting community related to predator management?
One of the biggest things that I always share is speak up and be vocal. our commissions and our legislatures, they can't represent our voice if we aren't willing to share it with them. So I really encourage everyone to speak up and share their message. A lot of the attacks that we see on hunting, they try and denigrate hunting, that we're a minority, that it's just ego, that it's not being used, that no one actually eats a predator. Why would we ever want to kill a predator? People aren't hearing the management message, and they're also not seeing the full scope of the life of a hunter. Share your pictures, share your stories start to finish, pictures of scouting, pictures of your actual hunting, and then pictures of the meals you make. Be vocal and be a good representative for this community. And I think that's the strongest thing we can do, is to just really tell our story in an efficient way.
Open it up to the group to see what your take-home messages are.
Mine's go ahead.
Go ahead, Chris. Go ahead.
Mine's similar to Marie's, which is you have to take action and make your voice heard. Safari Club's got a hunter action alert center. You can sign up for emails. There are professional people monitoring this activity all the time. We're sending out those alerts. If you can sign up for those alerts and make your voice heard, I think that's the most powerful message that you can bring.
Yeah, I'll weigh in real quickly if I may. Totally agree with what Marie and Chris said, as far as getting not only the NGOs coordinated in the way in unison on the same page with the same message, right? But the grassroots. There's no question that played a massive role in our ability to kill that bear legislative proposal ban last year, and the petition to the Fish and Game Commission to ban bear hunting this year. The other thing is build your science base while you can. One of the things that California has done, as I mentioned, we're doing a bear management plan right now, pretty much as a result of we started actually before the petition to the Fish and Game Commission, but it certainly got a lot of fuel, if you will, from that Fish and Game Commission. It's on a fast track. It's supposed to be completed by April of 2023. So they're working on building the science to back managing of bears, if you will, from a hunting perspective. Bobcat management plan I mentioned to you, that's also already on task. It'll be completed prior to the January 1st, 2025 date called out in the legislation. But we're also working on sheep management plans. We completed an elk management plan a couple of years ago. Right prior to that, the Center for Biological Diversity had the department pull back a whole bunch of proposed elk tags that they wanted to offer that year because they didn't have an elk management plan. Well, the department sat down, took them a few years to do it, but they built a rock solid science-based management plan that certainly provided all the support we needed for the hunting of elk. Again, we're working on one of those for sheep right now. We're working on one of those for deer right now. So building that science base that you can hold up, whether it be in front of the commission or even in front of the legislature, or hopefully not in front of the entire state, when you're facing something in the ballot box, but having that science base built and ready to go so you're not scrambling to try to do it after the fact would be the biggest take-home message I would offer to other states if you want to ward off future threats to hunting and conservation.
I've got something as well, and completely agree with what everyone else has said. And really just want to stress the public engagement, the hunting and fishing public engagement. Do it early, do it often. Oftentimes at our commission meetings, we only have those in opposition show up, and that's what our commission hears. Knowing there's a lot of support out there, folks need to show up and voice their support over the years, rather than at the very end when something makes it to the legislature or makes it to a spot where we start to lose a little control. So more involvement at those types of meetings, I think will go a long ways.
I have one more quick thing, which is if you are not a bear hunter or you're not a mountain lion hunter, you still need to comment. And Marie talked about that example of a commissioner saying, we're not going to just harvest cougars so we can hunt more elk. If you're just an elk hunter, that cougar issue impacts you directly. And people need to comment on those and comment and force. The spring bear season in Washington had over 26,000 comments. That's a crazy number of comments. but it's important. And I think that that was largely antis. I don't think we had a majority of hunters commenting there. So comments are critical. Thanks.
Let me weigh in real quick. I want to reiterate what Jason said, because we've been there, done that. And there was a time when I was like the only pro hunting guy to show up at the Fish and Game Commission, and I was buried with dozens, if not hundreds of people that were there for bobcats or whatever it may be. We've learned on that, and we've got the grassroots involved, and it does make a difference. Same with the state legislature. It's not just the NGOs weighing in anymore. We're coordinating very, very closely with the grassroots, calling their representatives, right? Because representatives here in California don't want to hear from somebody outside of their district, but they'll listen to you if you're from within their district. So building that grassroots space and employing it is incredibly important to the future of conservation.
I want to give a big thank you to our panelists for this wonderful insight on a very important topic that we all care deeply about. So thank you very much. We now have time to take a few questions from the audience. Again, I would like to tell our audience members to please direct your questions to the Q&A, and we will get right down to it. Let's see what we got here. How do states go around the ESA loopholes regarding management of wolves and grizzly bears? Nationally, neither species is threatened or endangered, only state. I think that's for the group.
I guess I'll start on that. And grizzly bears, I mean, it is still they're under federal protection, and that's something we do a lot of the work. We have a management plan for bears. We spend a lot of money managing bears, so it does help us when we go to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service with problem bears, problem areas, and we need to make management actions. Us having that information, us doing the work, they rely on that. So when we make a recommendation, most times, that's what we do. So again, I talked earlier about some frustration that we're not able to make those decisions without going through all those extra layers, but being involved, being a part of it, spending the money to manage them has paid off. So we're not necessarily getting around it, but it's helping us through the process. Yeah.
Thank you, Jason. Marie, in your introduction, you touched on some of the recent challenges in Washington State related to the Fish and Wildlife Commission. Aside from the spring bear hunting issue, have you seen other efforts to restrict predator management at the commission level?
Yes, so that is one of the big focuses of many of our commissioners right now, is just restricting all predator, not just hunting, but predator management. There's a big fight with sheriffs who are removing cougars for safety purposes, and commissioners are trying to fight against that. We did have a ban on predator contests or coyote contests as well in our state in early 2020. They're also hinting that they want to look at trapping and reducing wolf take due to conflicts. They want to put more restrictions in place on sort of non-lethal deterrence required before that lethal action could be initiated. And a lot of what we're seeing, kind of back on that last question, is how do they get around some of that? We're seeing it done through commission policies instead of being done through the WACs or through our RCWs, which is our rulemaking process. If they change their policy, so if they say that wolves cannot be delisted in our state until they meet these regulations, they can get around a lot of those SEPA analysis and a lot of the public comment process, because that's their policy and not an official law or rule. So that's kind of how they're getting around that, and they're using policy changes to enact all sorts of restrictions on management of predators.
Thank you very much, Marie. For Bill, what are some of the political challenges associated with managing predators in California that you are starting to see permeate other states? And how has this community responded?
Well, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, Hillary, the fact that the general public can easily petition the Fish and Game Commission to do something such as ban the hunting of bears in California, and the word's getting out on that is one of the challenges that we face. The commission is getting more and more petitions. They have a very strict policy as to how they deal with those. And so they can deny them or approve them or refer them to the department or some other agency for review and recommendation. I mean, that's their choices. Almost all the ones that have to do with any kind of wildlife management go to the department for review and recommendation. Problem with that is the department's got limited staff here in California when it comes to the wildlife branch. So that's taking a big chunk of their time at the same time. But nevertheless, they have made it easier for the public to weigh in on hunting, whether it be positive or negative. And that's one of the problems. It's a good thing, but it's a bad thing. And it's one of the things that we're dealing with here in California now. So that's one of the challenges. Obviously, the state legislature is getting more and more liberal every day here in California as our demographics are slowly getting worse, not better, when it comes to wildlife conservation and science-based wildlife management here in California. So yeah, we're seeing the same thing obviously in Oregon and Washington and elsewhere here on the West Coast. Like I said earlier, hopefully, since we're a little bit ahead of some of the other states, hopefully they can learn from some of the positive things that we've done here in California when it comes to like building our hunting and conservation coalition. I know Oregon's already done that, and I think Washington's moving in that direction as well. I believe Colorado has as well. I mean, so we've been able to react a little bit, and hopefully our ability to react and put up better defenses, if you will, to block some of these things is something that the other states can learn from our mistakes on, if you will.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Bill. This one is to the group. What do you feel is the best way to reach the voters in the middle of the spectrum, the people with no strong feelings or exposure to these issues and importance of predator management that are potentially the key group we need to get sound information to?
I could start on that. I think one of the key ways is to engage them early. We can't wait until, spring bear is about to be canceled to reach out to these groups. We need to engage with them early. And I really want to stress, like, sharing your story is kind of the thing I constantly stress. But because all they're hearing are keywords and catchphrases, and so they don't see the whole picture. So help them understand what hunters do, help them understand what conservation really means, so that when the moment matters, they've already got a base of understanding and knowledge. And then it's a lot easier to work with them instead of waiting till the last minute and try to catch them up. So I really think engage early and really share your story and share the story of conservation and what it means to the wildlife populations in our country.
Thank you very much, Marie. Unfortunately, we are just about out of time. I'm going to turn it over to Keely Hopkins to round us out for the day. But again, thank you very much to our panelists. Keely, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you again for all of our panelists for joining us today, and also for all of the attendees. If anyone has any lingering questions, if we didn't get to yours, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at CSF, and we'll do our best to answer them or connect you with the appropriate individual. For those who are interested in a more immersive experience on these and other sportsmen's related policy topics, we encourage you to join us in Bozeman, Montana for the annual NASC Sportsman Legislator Summit from November 29th through December 2nd. This hallmark event for the State Legislative Sportsmen's Caucus members and the broader sporting community will feature 3 days of policy discussions, demonstrations, and outdoor activities. Early bird registration is now open, and additional information can be found at www.nascsummit.org. Additionally, please make sure to mark your calendar for CSF's next virtual policy briefing on July 21st, titled More Harm Than Good: The Unique Challenges Associated with Managing Invasive Species. And thank you again, everyone, and we hope you all have a great rest of your day.